Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being so disciplined and being back here on time. We were warned that generals would discipline us if we didn't do that at the beginning, and everybody's behaved very well. Two quick housekeeping announcements before we commence. First of all, the headphones that you have are for the next session. Not for this one. Dr. Abdullah will be speaking in English, so I can reassure you on that. And the second one is that after we've finished this chat, by now, since you saw one yesterday, you'll know this is a 30-minute conversation, which then goes into question and answer, and then finishes promptly after 30 minutes, and then we go straight into the next session. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Abdullah, Chief Executive of Afghanistan. I think, as I said to you, these are very short and quick-fire conversations, and hopefully we can cover quite a lot of ground. I wanted to start off by asking you something that refers to, almost every discussion at this conference refers back at some point to US leadership. And where fears are expressed, they frequently come down to concerns that the United States under President Trump is or might be retreating back into itself. NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg yesterday reminded us that, in fact, the United States is in very important ways re-engaging in Europe. The new South Asia policy also looks more like a United States which is more, not less engaged in the world. Is this your impression too?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon to yourself and distinguished colleagues here. As far as leadership or leading role of the United States is concerned in regards to Afghanistan is the past 16 years. That has been very evident, but at the same time with the announcement of the South Asia policy by President Trump, that emerged in a different phase of the war based on the necessities and priorities. And then it was based on that once the South Asia policy was announced in recent defense ministers' meeting in Brussels. Other countries were also forthcoming. So when it comes to Afghanistan and President Trump's policy or U.S. administration's policy, they are playing that leading role. The policy came after some deliberations in Washington between President Trump and his national security team. But at the same time, nevertheless, there is more clarity today. There is more focused interest as far as Afghanistan is concerned.
Was there a time when you were concerned about, it must be a concern when there's a change. You've been through, three American presidents in the time since the first intervention in Afghanistan. And I suppose every change of administration causes you to wonder, will the next administration show continuity in its support? Was there a time, perhaps in 2016, where you and your colleagues in government in Afghanistan were genuinely worried about what was going to happen?
From one side, we could see very clearly that what was at stake there for the United States as well as the international community. There was no blurred vision as far as we were concerned. And our hope was that the U.S. administration will take it as such. At the same time, nevertheless, during July discussions in Washington, it was the reflection of the concerns amongst the other allies that would have impacted us as well, because other NATO allies were concerned when it was said that serious questions were raised by President Trump to its national security team, and everybody was trying to find an answer to that. Yes, of course, there were some concerns, but we were pretty sure that the interest and real interest of the United States remained the same, to stay committed and stay engaged. Of course, with the new elements in the South Asia policy, which is now it is condition-based rather than time-bound, and also the focus on the safe havens, sanctuaries in Pakistan as one of the main issues there, and certain other elements. And also there is our commitment. We have a compact with the United States, which is multifaceted, and there are mutual commitments, and we also have to refocus there to make that policy successful for our common interest.
I guess policy towards Afghanistan is always a work in progress, as is governance of Afghanistan. But what I take from your remarks, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but my interpretation is that in some important respects, there has actually been progress. Such things as removing the idea of timetables is something which is actually an improvement, perhaps even, if you dare to say, on the Obama administration.
Yes, I may go a little bit back when we started getting really worried. This was in early years, when the United States shifted attention towards Iraq. We thought that there might be a losing of attention in a very important issue, which was Afghanistan, Pakistan, Al-Qaeda. Which nevertheless there were some impacts, and the enemies of peace and stability and terrorist groups utilized that as an opportunity. But this time around, yes, of course, we welcome the South Asia policy, the condition-based approach to create conditions on the ground so the Taliban are forced to come to the negotiating table, rather than giving them a time that we'll be here until such a time, and then leave it at that stage, or every other 6 months have a review. So this is a very positive debate.
Yeah. So actually, I wanted to ask you specifically. So having removed from policy the idea of timetables, and this seems to be absolutely central now to the Trump administration's policy. This is actually, is it fair to say, this has actually made it a lot easier to deal with the Taliban? Perhaps easy is the wrong word in any respect dealing with the Taliban, in the sense that they don't now have a view that they can simply sit something out and wait for...
Absolutely. That's the... when I mentioned earlier that clarity, that's clarity of purpose. That we need to get the job done, and at the same time create conditions for talks in peace, rather than giving a timetable which would have had its own implications.
One area, there could be many areas where I think there still appears to be a degree of difficulty in getting clarity. In outlining the new strategy on August the 21st, if memory serves, President Trump talked about the United States was not nation building, we are killing terrorists, he said. He said the United States needs to see real reforms. But he also said, and I quote from that speech, "We will not dictate to Afghan people how to live." Now, it's not clear to me what you are being asked to do. What is it exactly that the United States now wants the Afghan government to do in terms of its domestic policy, so that at the same time the United States is not dictating how Afghans live, but at the same time wants to see real reforms?
Reform is an agenda for us, first and foremost, and also the expectation of our people. And in certain areas we have seen progress, and nevertheless things started like 16 years back from the scratch. Even a scratch will look like, from when we visualized that situation, a little bit of exaggeration. So things started from that point. And there have been progress in terms of reform. There have been so many rounds of elections, though at times complicated rounds of elections. So reforms in the electoral process took place after the formation of the unity government. Reform in the civilian sector as well as in the national defense and security forces are underway. A few years back, we were talking about ghost soldiers, and today we are talking about electronic salary payment system which is in place. So these are big progress. And I also mentioned earlier about the compact between Afghanistan and the United States. That compact has several elements, which reform is an important element in it. As far as nation building is concerned, nation building is underway. We are planning for parliamentary elections and district council elections in 2018. There have been some delays, I have to admit, and we have to make up for that missing time. There will be presidential elections in 2019, and state institutions are being built. When President Trump mentioned that we are not nation building is taking place. Afghans are doing it.
In other words, he means it's not the United States doing the nation building, it's you.
At the beginning of it, there was a lot of help from the United Nations, and there as well the United States was playing a lead role, there is no doubt. But then we are 16 years from the start of that process.
As you said, and it's precisely the point I wanted to come to, after 16 years of US military engagement in Afghanistan, there've been many twists and turns, and the American and wider Western public could be forgiven for being confused, and no more so now than in the issue of involving the Taliban. I mean, if you ask the average person on the street why we went into Afghanistan, it was to get rid of the Taliban. And now United States policy is specifically to bring the Taliban to the table. In order to keep the public on side, can you explain why it is now so necessary to deal with the Taliban? What kind of dealing does that mean? Does that mean some kind of power sharing in government? And can you give a sense of any time frame so that the public, again, I mean, we have to keep the public involved if we're going to keep the politicians engaged as well.
To begin with, the United States reacted when September 11th incidents took place in Washington, in New York. That's the background. But Taliban at that time had harbored Osama bin Laden in its networks, and they were freelancing in Afghanistan and planning events with the magnitude of events in Washington, in New York tragedies, and elsewhere. So it was under those circumstances that the United States intervened in Afghanistan, and it was welcomed by the people of Afghanistan. Nevertheless, in between, I mentioned about Iraq. I have no doubt in my mind Iraqis deserved to be liberated and to live in under better circumstances. And nobody envies Saddam Hussein's regime or anything about it. At the same time, the intervention in Iraq took a lot of focus and attention there. And it was in between those years the double game played, unfortunately, in our neighborhood in regards to fight against terror. That in itself also attributed to the complications afterwards. And then we had 2014 in the withdrawal date. That in itself had some impacts. So the unity government, the national unity government, inherited a rather complicated situation.
And can you envisage a time, I mean, it must be, of course, nobody wants to talk about, it's actually American policy not to talk about timelines, but where the Taliban actually is part of a power-sharing government?
I would say that the minute they give up on their relations with terrorist organizations, and they are ready to come to the negotiating table. Already the position of the National Unity Government, supported by our people, first and foremost, but at the same time by our partners, has been that we keep the door open for talks and negotiations. But there are certain factors that has to be taken into account. The terrorist groups, international terrorists, which are now the allies of Taliban, they don't have a place in the political system or the future of the country, and that's one issue. And if Taliban opt for political process and fight for their rights, no wonder how strange their ideas are, and they enter the political sphere. I think the people will welcome that. At the same time, I'm pretty confident that they will reject their ideas, and they will not find traction amongst the people, amongst millions of people which want to have peaceful life, forward-looking people, younger generation, which want to live in peace within and without, and also enjoy their basic rights, fundamental rights, human rights, and women's rights. So that's not my concern. The concern is the stubbornness that they have shown so far, and the belief that they have that they should come back by force, and their connections with the terrorist groups in the sanctuaries and safe havens that they enjoy outside Afghanistan, and then they continue to inflict casualties upon our people.
Just one very quick question before I turn this over to the audience. What are the Russians up to with the Taliban right now?
I think we should find out here as well. And in one or two occasions, I had interactions with Russian officials, and recently one of their security officials visited Afghanistan. There is a perception there as if, and they say it clearly, that Daesh is especially Daesh in Afghanistan is US made, which for us, for those of us which are on the ground, and which are our people, our forces, as well as with the support from the US and allies, are fighting Daesh days in and out. It has to be a bit strange, and also to think so that so there are these arguments, or they say that Taliban are not a threat to the international peace. If harboring terrorism and terrorists from all around the world is what Taliban has been doing at the moment, especially from Central Asian republics and some from Chechnya. This is not a threat to international peace, so what could be? So there is a dilemma as far as their position in regards to Afghanistan is concerned. And I would say that this might be related to other issues as well, but we are...
They're not making mischief.
Our way forward will be to talk to them, to engage with them, and to convince them that see things as they are, and see what could be done about it.
Thank you. I'd love to follow up and ask 5 more questions, but I'd like to push it out to the audience, please.
Paula Derbriansky, Harvard University. I want to follow on. You asked about Russia, Iran. How do you fit Iran in the overall calculation and the achievement of stabilization, security goals for the future of Afghanistan?
Okay. We do have good relations with Iran and with all the other neighboring countries. And we also made efforts in order for the betterment of our relations with Pakistan. Recently, there have been some reports that are cause of concern for us. The contacts with Taliban, they do say that they do have contacts, but there are reports that it shows that it's more than that. We are working on that. It's in our interest to keep our neighboring countries engaged in a constructive manner. Iran has been supporting the government of Afghanistan in the past 16 years, there is no doubt. And also earlier when the Bonn Agreement and Bonn Conference was held, their role was very positive. They continued a positive role. Recently, there are some reports which have raised some concerns, but we have to work with them, and we have to yes, of course, for Iran, Daesh is the enemy number one, and we have no argument against that. That's understandable. But we are dealing with Daesh in our country, and we consider Daesh as enemies. And the US and international coalition, NATO, are supporting our forces in order to enable us to deal with Daesh. So that's the common point. When it comes to the Taliban, if they have leverages over the Taliban, that should be used in a positive manner in the interest of peace and stability in Afghanistan. And we should, I believe that we should keep countries which are developing or they are having different ideas engaged in a positive manner.
Thank you. That's the question. I see another question. One, whilst people are thinking of another question, one thing I wanted to come back to, and this relates to, again, to the question of what you can do in terms of reforms at home. One of the big issues that was raised in the 2000s was the question of women's rights in Afghanistan. This has been obviously a central theme of this conference. The Canadian government is taking a very robust lead on women in international security, but also women in conflict resolution. How would you assess the status of women in Afghan society today as compared to, and let's give it quite a long, we've been, as you said, in Afghanistan from the West 16 years. From 2001, I mean, is it night and day? Is it just an incremental change here and there? Does it depend which part of Afghanistan you're talking about?
Oh, night and day will be a very sharp contrast. But I would say that a lot has happened positively. There is no comparison. There is no doubt that there is no comparison between what's happening today and the situation before 2001. Where, sorry to say that women were treated by Taliban as subhumans throughout the country, and they were denied every right, deprived from every right that they had, including the right of education, work, or political participation, anything as such. So that was the dark era, which is behind us. In parts of the country, which those parts are still under the Taliban control, unfortunately, the conditions are more or less the same, but millions of women who are living in areas under the government control, areas which they live together, they work, they participate in the political process, they are members of the parliament, they are active in the private sector, civil society, media, millions of girls at school. So you can call it day and light, but why I didn't? Because we still have some way to grow, because then we have unfortunate cases of violence against women in parts of the country. And when we say violence, sometimes we receive increased reports about it. Again, there is another side to it. Now there is more awareness. Now there is more means and ways of communication in learning about it. And then in dealing with it, there have been a lot of reforms in the judiciary sector. And in law and order system. So progress is big, progress is huge, and I want to say that these achievements are due to brave Afghan women who have fought for their rights, who have shown resilience, at the same time supported by the government, and the international community has also played a very important role. Canada, to begin with, has been a champion amongst the others.
Thank you. The gentleman there.
Thank you. Vance Sturchuk from KKR. Dr. Abdullah, in 2014, the Afghan presidential election, which you were a leading candidate, produced a political crisis. Afghanistan has parliamentary elections next year, presidential elections scheduled the year after that. Are you confident that these votes are on track to go successfully? And if not, what do we need to do, the international community, the Afghan government, to ensure that democracy in Afghanistan is successful?
It's important what happened in 2014. We can draw a lot of lessons, and we have taken stock of those lessons in the reform process, which was underway. One of the important recommendations for transparent elections has been the providing voters list pinned to the polling stations where they vote. There has to be a voters list provided beforehand. This has been one of the important steps, and also certain other steps which has been taken to reform. It's what the people of Afghanistan expect us. Parliamentary elections 2018, and we are making our best efforts. The international community is supportive. Recently, there have been some concerns about the leadership in the Independent Election Commission. The commission itself decided about the replacement of the chair, which might help with a good replacement, might help in the upcoming months for us to, as a government, to be able to support that independent commission, and for the international community to help us, and also for the commission to deliver better elections. In 2014, it took the country to a very delicate situation, very risky situation. That situation was rescued as a result of a formula that we agreed, which is national unity government. But we shouldn't take the country, we shouldn't pose the same risk to the country. Not only that, but our people which have made so many sacrifices to achieve their rights, they deserve better elections.
I wanted to conclude this brief conversation, which I would love to continue for another half hour, but we can't. Bouncing off that question, which is a big picture question, which is relevant obviously to your country, to yourself, to your people, also to the people in the West. And I don't want this to sound like a job interview question, what is your vision for Afghanistan in 5 years' time? But in all seriousness, what do you envisage for your country? If we looked, let's say, 10 years down the road, a real world, but perhaps optimistic version of a real world vision of what your country could look like, what do you think is going to happen in your country in the next decade?
Whenever somebody talks about 2014, I need an extra glass of water. How it looks in some years to come. I firmly believe that we have come a long way from where it was. Take just the security situation. A few years back, it was 150,000 international troops which were supporting security in Afghanistan. Today, main responsibility is on the shoulders of our own people. but we are grateful to the support provided by the international community. Look at economy. Things are moving. The private sector, though there was a lull earlier because of uncertainties, but now things are moving. Afghans are investing in their country, and billions of dollars of investment has been done by the Afghans themselves. But now we hope that we open the door for big foreign investment. There are challenges, of course. Security is one, but there are other areas that we are dealing with it to create enabling environment for investment. Our relations with our neighboring countries, the hope of the neighboring countries to benefit from the location of Afghanistan through transit, business, trade, rail connections. The neighboring countries have made investment in bringing it to our borders and also to our big cities. There are lots of hopes in many areas, in the hopes on the younger generation, which are talented, vibrant, civil society, free media. These are all important elements which makes us hopeful, and put it in perspective with a situation that there was none. There was a resistance against Taliban in Al-Qaeda. The resistance was taking place in isolation, no support from the international community. So my hope is on the resilience in energy, in aspiration of our own people, but at the same time, I urge our partners to stay committed. It is doable, and we will see better future for us and for all.
I think we wish you all well, and I'd like everyone to join me in thanking Dr. Abdullah. Thank you very much indeed.